Hey guys, how we doing? Thanks for joining me once again for another round of Saturday Stories. I say stories, but this is one story today. The upload is not any shorter than it usually is, but this is probably one of the longest stories I've ever read out on this channel. So long, in fact, I've had to dedicate the whole this week's upload to this one story. But I thought it was quite a good story when I read through it. So I'll see what you guys think. I'm sure I'll get plenty of comments. Whether you like one long story or several short ones, you can let me know in the comment section below, okay? And the background video I shot a couple of weeks ago here in Hua Hin. It was near the beach, but it was quite a rough day as far as it was quite windy and it wasn't the best of days, but you can get an idea what the area is like. Okay, so let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into the first and only story today.
สวัสดีค่ะ
This trip to Bangkok was my first proper visit there, having only flown in and out of the city with a girlfriend in February 2014. There was civil unrest there at the time, and we only spent a few hours there before hurriedly leaving on a 3-week tour of Cambodia, Laos and northern Thailand. This time though, I was travelling by myself on a journey that also took me to the United Arab Emirates, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand and the Philippines. I'd originally planned on going to Southeast Asia section of my trip with a mate of mine who owns his own business, but due to unexpectedly heavy workload, he had to cancel his plans to come with me with only a week to go before we were due to leave. This was a shame, as it's always good to have some company when travelling, but I'm happy to go on holiday by myself, so it didn't stop me from having a great time. And as it turned out, I wasn't alone for very long. I'd done some research on where to stay when I arrived in Bangkok, and I made a point of booking a room right in the middle of Sukhumvit Road near Soi 15. I'd seen a few videos on YouTube of scores of young women chatting with men inside the Therme Cafe, which is conveniently located under the hotel. I thought that this would be the best location I could possibly hope for, and I was not disappointed because it all worked out perfectly for me. I'd arrived at Bangkok on an early morning flight from Dubai and was collected from the airport by a pre-booked taxi. I went straight to my hotel, but it was too early for me to check in. However, the hotel staff were happy for me to leave my luggage there, and I just took a small bag with me as I wandered around the local area taking in the sights, doing some shopping for toiletries, buying some healthy snacks to have in my room, along with some beer and a small bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey, and having a nice lunch in the air-conditioned shopping centre nearby. I was surprised at how much the food had cost at the restaurant, but I put that down to it being the inside of a new mall, and they must be catering for the affluent Japanese and Chinese tourists that I saw walking around. I'd not been in Thailand for over a decade, and I recall thinking at the time that the food was cheap, so I guess that Thailand's modernisation has its consequences. I then went back to my hotel at 2 p.m. to book in. After that, I took a quick shower and then went up a flight of steps to take a relaxing dip in the rooftop swimming pool at the hotel. I remember looking around the swimming pool when I got there and seeing that I was the only person there. This was great because I couldn't stop grinning to myself and thinking that after what seemed like a very long time, I was finally back in Thailand, and by booking into this hotel, I created an opportunity to meet some of the most exotic beauties that I could ever hope to meet. With my spirits high, I had not slept since I had left the UK around 48 hours earlier. So even though I was in a great mood, I wasn't feeling very energetic. So half an hour of swimming was more than enough for me, and I almost fell asleep whilst I was sunbathing. However, I wasn't going to allow my sleep deprivation to get in the way of meeting some very attractive women that evening. Talking of women, part of my backstory is that I'd gone through a very traumatic divorce from a woman who had seemed to enjoy being unnecessarily cruel and malicious towards me. Consequently, I've deliberately led a very quiet life for the last 16 years, and I've concentrated on being the best dad I can be to my 2 daughters, who have both been living with me for the last decade. I felt that women in the UK were simply too much trouble for very little reward, and I was content to just not bother with the dating scene at all. Up to that night, I'd not had aerobics for many years. As you can imagine now that I was on holiday abroad and without my daughters, being with me for the first time in a very long time, I really felt like I'd been let off the lead, and I was really looking forward to getting to know some of the locals over the next few days. I'm not much of a drinker, so I decided that Therme Cafe would be the only place I'd frequent while in Bangkok. I've listened to many of the stories on your channel about some of the guys' adventures in the other famous parts of Bangkok, but I'm saving those locations for when I come back to Bangkok in a year or two with a couple of my friends, when it'll be more fun to walk the streets and pop into all the different bars to watch the girls dancing. I'm certainly not adverse to the idea of paying a bar fine, but I was happy just to see who I'd meet inside Therme Cafe during this visit. Once it was time to start preparing for the night's activities, I set my room up, going to the effort of creating room lighting, having expensive scented candles bought from the local mall that morning. On the go along with soft music from the radio might seem like way too much effort to go to, but I can assure you, your listeners, that it was appreciated by each of the women who spent time there. And they all made nice comments to me about how inviting my room looked. I know that spending a short time with an attractive young woman isn't the start of some amazingly long-term romantic relationship, but there's no harm in showing some courtesy and appreciation for them as fellow human beings. What they do to make money and how much effort they put into looking their best when they arrive at the cafe. After all, most men know how long it will take an average-looking woman to get ready for a night out, and these women are, for the most part, well above the average women in terms of their looks. And as I said, they all liked that I'd made the effort to make them feel comfortable, and I certainly reaped the benefits of my efforts when we got to my room. After I was happy that my room looked inviting, I then spent about half an hour getting myself ready to go out, and I dressed to impress. Over the years, I've taken a keen interest in watching and reading about how people interact with one another, and I know that most people will unconsciously decide whether they like someone or not within just a few seconds of meeting them. I felt sure that by having a shave and a shower, using a good quality aftershave, dressing well, being the polite, confident and friendly guy that I normally am, I would make a good first impression with the women that I was about to meet. It might sound strange that I was going to all this effort, as these types of situations aren't really what you could call a regular date. But I'm happy to say that this approach worked consistently well for me, as the women all seem to appreciate the effort I've gone to. I've been told by women that I'm still an attractive guy, and even though I have an average physique for my age, I was pretty sure that having the confidence to approach any of the women in the cafe would help to offset my age. I took the lift down to the foyer, and as I walked out of the front door to the hotel, I saw an absolutely stunning young woman walking towards the steps that led down into Therme Cafe. I quickly skipped down the steps of my hotel to catch up with her, and as I followed her inside, I was ushered over to the bar to buy myself a drink while she was paying her 50 baht fee to be allowed to visit the cafe. Within around 45 seconds of me walking into the cafe, I'd walked over to her with a beer in my hand and said, "Sawadee krap." To her, she politely replied, "Sawadee ka," and I asked her if she spoke English. She said the usual phrase, "a little," which is sometimes code for "yes, I do speak English quite well, but I'd rather that you think I haven't been doing this line of work very long, so I'll pretend that I'm new to it." It was at this point that I decided to try out a theory that I'd been thinking about for the last few hours. I'm going to risk being called a cheap Charlie at this point, and it's a fair point. The background to my theory was that earlier that day I'd managed to buy an apparently brand new pair of genuine wraparound Ray-Ban sunglasses from a street vendor for the equivalent of just over 250 baht, simply by halving whatever price he first gave me, working up from there. I do know that being in the cafe was an entirely different situation, but I was away on a 5-week trip and I had set of budgets that I wanted to work to. The evening's activities came under my entertainment budget, which wasn't a very large amount, unfortunately. I was curious to see if the approach I took with the sunglasses salesman might also work inside the cafe this evening. After all, this is a service industry and the women were all perfectly able to raise or lower their service fee depending on the circumstances. I told the woman I was talking to, whose name was May, that I had a room upstairs and wondered if she'd be happy to spend a short time up there with me for 2,500 baht. She raised her hand to point to the ceiling and asked me, "Upstairs at this hotel?" To which I said yes. To my absolute delight, she accepted my offer without any further questions. I understand that 3,000 to 4,000 is what they often ask for, so whether it is my boyish charm, the effort I'd gone to with my appearance, my confidence in going straight over to her, or simply because she needed the money, I'll never know. But within 90 seconds of arriving at Therme Cafe, I was walking back to my room with a real beauty. As we walked out of the cafe and back up the steps, May held her left hand out, and a guy sitting on a bar stool at the top of the steps stamped the back of her hand with an ink pad. I guess that this was so that May could go back later without having to pay again. As a joke, I held out my left hand to be stamped too, and the guy looked up at me surprised and then laughed. If I was younger, fitter and much richer, I may well have wanted to go back again later because there were scores of beautiful women in the cafe that evening, which was my first ever encounter with a lady like this. She turned out to be great company, and after dropping her ID card off at the reception, we chatted and laughed as we took the lift upstairs. Just before the lift doors closed, another Western guy and an attractive younger Thai woman also walked into the lift, and it made me think that the hotel must make a lot of money over the past 40 to 50 years because of the cafe downstairs. When we reached my room, May was pleasantly surprised that my room had a nice ambience to it, and it wasn't long before we were showering together. My second shower within about half an hour, and we then spent a very happy couple of hours in bed. Before she left, I asked her if she was going to be free to see me the next afternoon. I offered to pay her to keep me company for a shorter time, and then, if she wanted to, we could cool off with a dip in the swimming pool on the roof. She gave me her WhatsApp information, and I asked her to come to the hotel at 5 p.m, which she said she would do. My room overlooked the front of the hotel, and it was a very busy and noisy road that didn't quieten down until about 2 a.m. each morning. Happily though, the hotel staff had very thoughtfully placed a pair of earplugs next to my bed, which did allow me to have a few hours sleep each night. When I first came to Thailand 17 years ago, the country wasn't as developed and everything seemed cheap. But these days there are new malls springing up, and the price of goods and services has risen with them. In some ways, this modernization is very welcome, but I've listened to several podcasts lately where the presenters are saying that Thailand has lost its value for money and other Southeast Asian countries offer better value, so tourists should start to go there instead. Naturally, this does not bode well for Thailand because so much of its economy relies on tourism. It was a very hot day and I tried to stay out of the sun as much as possible. By 3 p.m, I was walking back into my hotel and in need of a cold shower. After a refreshing shower, I caught up with emails and then spent time on social media with my friends and family for about an hour. At 5 p.m, I went downstairs to wait for May. I'm aware that Thai time and the real time are two different things, but after half an hour, I messaged her saying that I thought she'd forgotten me, with a laughing emoji, and to let me know if she was coming over. Soon after I sent that message, I decided that she had probably got a better offer from another guy, and it was therefore unlikely that she'd be coming over to see me. I went back upstairs to my room, and shortly after that my second night in Bangkok went badly wrong, and my plans for the evening went straight out the window. I had an unexpected message from my credit card provider saying that they had found what they regarded as a suspicious activity on my account, which was a small charge of 100 baht for a new subscription. They didn't think the transaction was legitimate and asked me if I knew what it was for. Unfortunately, I didn't recognize the company who had applied for the amount. If I approved them as a legitimate supplier, then I'd be liable for whatever amount they decided to take out of my account. I needed this credit card because I still needed to book flights and hotels for other destinations, so I spent the next 7 hours that evening trying to call, email, and message everyone that I'd already arranged numerous day trips, hotel bookings and flights with over the next 5 weeks in case their parent company was the one with a name that I didn't recognise. It was at that time that I also discovered that my phone provider had suddenly stopped me being able to make phone calls and sending messages because I'd reached the cutoff point for roaming data, which made it even harder for me as I had to overcome that issue before I could even talk to anyone else. I had to involve two family members back in the UK to contact my phone provider for me because I couldn't even call my phone provider and relay their progress on my laptop via the hotel Wi-Fi. Consequently, it was well past midnight before I concluded that this charge of £1.63 or around 100 baht was a scam and that I'd have to cancel my credit card. As you might imagine, by this time I was feeling too tired and annoyed to look for any female company. Having either a credit card or a bank card cloned is a disaster when outside one's home country because they won't send a new card to another country regardless of how long you're away from your home. Sadly, I ended up having to cancel my credit card, so I was down to just one card for the next month, which was far from ideal. Note to self, take at least 3 cards away with you in case you need to cancel one of them. There's an old military saying that goes, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Because if you only have one of something, if there's a problem with it, then you literally have none. Just as I was about to go to bed, I got a message from May saying simply, "Sorry, I just woke up." I knew that couldn't be true, but there's nothing to be gained by starting an argument with a bar girl. So I just replied, "Oh, you must have been very tired." May with a laughing emoji. "I hope you feel better now." She said something about going out to make merit this morning and going to bed late because the shop was closed. As lovely looking as she was, I knew the chances were that she'd just finished with a client and was wondering if she could pop over to make some more cash from me without having to go back to the cafe. It was getting late and there weren't many men still there, but I wasn't going to reward her for ignoring me all day. So I just told her I was pleased she made merit and glad that she slept well. I didn't message her again after that because she obviously didn't value my company very highly, which was probably because other men were prepared to pay her more for her time than I did. Naturally enough, bar girls and freelancers will always chase whoever pays the most, and not always who they like the most. They all seem to remember the phrase, "there are no friends in business." On my 3rd day in Bangkok, I went out visiting temples and did other touristy things for the day. After which, I went for another swim on the rooftop pool as soon as I got back to the hotel. This time, there were several other guys there, either swimming lengths or sunbathing, but only one couple who looked to be in the 40s. I had to wonder why a guy would take his wife with him to a hotel that was literally sitting on top of arguably one of the best places in Thailand to meet beautiful women. His wife was an average-looking, overweight, middle-aged person, and it made me think that his situation must be a bit like being a diabetic who's just walked into the world's most exciting sweet shop and knowing that there's nothing in there that you are allowed to have. I'd imagine that it must have been very frustrating for him to see so many slim, gorgeous young women being led into the bedrooms of so many average-looking, middle-aged men in our hotel and knowing that he would never, ever get to do that because he'd brought his wife with him. If she's like the majority of women, including my ex-wife, she's never going to let him anywhere near a younger, much more beautiful woman. However, if she happened to also fancy beautiful women and wanted to share one with him, then I guess her husband would have been one of the happiest guys in Thailand. After I'd had enough of swimming, I sat in a little room next to the pool with my laptop and caught up with emails for an hour and then went onto booking.com and booked some flights and hotels for the next stage of my trip. Talking of laptops, I had a very unfortunate incident with my laptop whilst I was at Dubai airport preparing to depart for Bangkok, where it had fallen off a 4-foot tall counter that I'd very stupidly placed it on whilst I was searching for something in my carry-on bag. Remarkably, it landed end on when it had hit the floor, and incredibly the soft packaging in the laptop case that I kept it in is what saved it from being badly damaged. I'd immediately picked the case up and I was absolutely sure that the fall would have smashed the laptop screen. But to my utter relief, I saw that the only damage was that the metal surround to one of the USB ports had been damaged so much that a USB cable wouldn't fit in there anymore. But other than that, the laptop was still usable. Note to self, don't place valuable items that can be easily destroyed onto high top places and then accidentally knock them off onto the floor. That evening, I made all the same room and personal preparations that I'd made on my first night, and I wandered into the cafe around 9:30 p.m. I've really no idea what the best time is to go because it was 9 p.m. when I met May on the first night I was here, and she only just arrived. This time when I bought a Jack Daniels, I walked around and spoke with a very pretty young woman, whose name I don't remember, who was standing quietly on the left-hand side of the room. I tried my usual charm, but she wasn't interested in going upstairs with me, so I wished her a good night and I continued around the cafe until I noticed what seemed like an older woman looking at me. I'll say woman, but I wasn't very sure that she definitely was a woman. May had told me that only Thai women are allowed inside the cafe, but this woman looked to me like she could have been a ladyboy. She was sitting on a chair, and as I walked past her, she reached out and touched my arm and quickly said, "I go with you for 2,000 baht, short time." I'm sure she was a lovely person, but ladyboys aren't my thing, and I didn't feel like taking a chance with her, so I politely replied, "Thank you, that's a good offer, but I've just got here, so I'm going to walk around and talk to some other people," and kept walking. I felt a little uncomfortable turning her down, but there were so many gorgeous women in the cafe that I'd have kicked myself later if I hadn't chosen one that I was attracted to. It would also have been very awkward for me if that person had turned out to be a ladyboy and I really didn't want to be in that situation. I've heard too many horror stories where men have invited a woman back to their room only to find out they're actually invited a ladyboy back to their room, and things have become very awkward because the ladyboy then demands to be paid for her time even though she had lied to the guy about being a woman and nothing has happened. I kept walking around, and after only a few seconds I saw a slim, attractive young woman standing quietly by the S-shaped bar. So I walked over and said the traditional Thai greeting. Her name was Bo, and she was happy to accompany me upstairs for a short time for the usual amount. As I walked out of the front door with Bo, I couldn't help but notice a gorgeous woman standing to the left of the door in a low-cut black dress. Even with so many truly beautiful women in the cafe, this woman stood out as being the best looking one there and as close to my idea of a 10 out of 10. As I'd seen anywhere, whilst this might sound strange, it wouldn't surprise me if she wasn't approached very often, as very beautiful women can be quite intimidating to men. However, I was happy that I'd met Bo, who turned out to be great fun, and her English was good enough that it was easy to talk with her and have a laugh. Now, I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that a woman will enjoy their time with a man much more if she also gets to fully enjoy our time together, as May had done with me the night before. And so I was strangely surprised when Bo told me that she hadn't ever been able to do that, not even by herself. I jokingly said, "I think you might be in the wrong line of work, Bo," and thankfully she also saw the funny side, as she could see the irony of not being able to fully enjoy her chosen career to the same extent that other women do. It was a good experience nonetheless, and Bo seemed happy to have spent time with me. I certainly enjoyed our time together, and I asked her for a WhatsApp information so that we could keep in touch. After she left, I had another shower and then went to bed. Later that afternoon, I sent Bo a message on WhatsApp saying that if she'd like to meet me again, she should reply to me by 8 p.m. She never replied to me, and to be fair, I think I've only got myself to blame for the lack of enthusiasm the women I'd met so far had for spending time with me after our first encounter, because I was offering them less money than they would have made with another guy. Shortly after 8 p.m, I walked out of my hotel and towards Therme Cafe. On the way down the stairs, I passed 3 absolutely gorgeous looking women leaving with 3 different men, and I silently cursed myself for not getting there a few minutes earlier, because I'd have been delighted to get to know any one of them. I realised then that it would take me around 2.5 months of going into cafes every night before I would have spent time with every attractive woman I'd seen in there. Very sadly, I don't have the time or the money to do that. But if I ever win the lottery, I know that I'll have to come up with a brilliant excuse to my friends and family as to why I'm always going back and forth to Bangkok. The 10 in the black dress that I'd noticed when walking out with Bo the night before, who turned out to be called Pink, was standing by the front door again. So as soon as I'd bought a drink, I walked up to her to start a conversation. She knew that she was arguably the best looking woman in the cafe, and before I could even ask her anything, she stated that if I wanted to spend a short time with her, it would cost 4,000 baht and nothing less. I quickly did a mental calculation to convert 4,000 baht into UK pounds sterling, and it's over £90, which means that the cost of spending a short time with Pink in Thailand is very nearly the price you'd pay for a lady back in the UK. Perhaps this is why some guys are now complaining that women, and for that matter hotel owners and bar owners in Thailand, have become too greedy and that everything here is now becoming too expensive. I countered Pink's statement by offering her 3,000 baht for a short time, but she politely turned me down. That may well have been for her way of telling me that I was definitely not her type, which is of course absolutely her right to say, and it was perfectly fine with me because no one wants to be intimate with a person they don't find attractive. I said that I hoped she'd have a good night and I walked away. Whilst there weren't as many women there as there had been the previous nights, there were still dozens of gorgeous women waiting to be chatted to. I have to make a comment at this point about the behaviour of most of the men in the cafe. I've been surprised to see how many men just sit down with their drink and look at some of the most attractive women they're ever likely to get the chance of meeting, and then they don't make any effort to go over and talk to them. What's the point in even going there if you don't go over and say hello? The women there aren't allowed to approach the men, so if the men there don't try to talk to them, nothing will ever happen. You'd be hard pressed to gently throw a pair of balled up socks in any direction in that cafe without it bouncing off an absolutely stunning looking young woman. So for goodness sake, fellas, if you do go there, please don't hang around, because if a guy like me happens to be there, then there's a good chance that he'll walk out with the very women that you have walked off with if you hadn't just sat down and stared at her for the last half an hour. My attitude is that if I'm going to travel 11 hours on a plane to get somewhere, I'm darn sure that I'll be taking every opportunity I can to make some amazing memories whilst I'm there. I slowly walked around for about 20 seconds before I chose to talk with a friendly looking young woman whose name turned out to be Ling. She was around 5'1" tall and had a slightly fuller figure than the average Thai woman, although she was still in great shape. She was very friendly, and within just a few seconds she had accepted my offer, and I followed her as we walked towards the door. As we approached the door I saw Bo casually walking into the cafe. She saw me and that I was leaving with another woman, and she didn't react at all. I'd given her almost 3 hours to reply to my WhatsApp message, so I didn't feel bad about not hanging around for her on the off chance that she would turn up. If she'd bothered to reply to me, I would have happily waited for her to arrive, but as I said, I hadn't offered her as much money as other men might have done, so I simply wasn't as valuable to her as the other guys were. Once inside my room, Ling turned out to be a real pocket rocket and was much more passionate and willing than, well, pretty much any of the women I'd ever known in my life. I watched her taking in the sights and sounds of Bangkok at night as I dried myself off with another towel. She seemed fascinated by all the colourful lights from the various nearby buildings, and it seemed to put her in a very good mood. Ling loved kissing, and to say that I was totally shocked about how eager she was to spend a short time with me would be an understatement. However, I'm old enough to know a good thing when I see it, and after we'd dried ourselves, I was delighted to have a truly amazing aerobic session with her. I'm still grinning like a Cheshire cat as I write this. She told me afterwards that she lived in a village in the north of Thailand and had come down to Bangkok earlier that day to stay with a friend for a week to earn some money. Apparently, she hadn't had a boyfriend for a year and had only walked into the cafe for the first time about 10 minutes before I had, which is why she was so happy that I'd chosen her on her first day in the city. It's hard to know if this is actually true, but by that point there wasn't really a reason for her to lie about anything, as I'd already told her it was my last night in Bangkok, so perhaps it was true. If I'd met her on my first night, I would have seen Ling every night. I was there because she was such good fun to be with. If I hadn't already paid for a hotel in Pattaya, I may well have stayed in Bangkok with Ling for the next 4 days. I even fleetingly thought about taking her down to Pattaya with me for the 4 days that I was going to be there, but I decided that I'd find someone to spend time with when I got there, although I knew that Ling would be a tough act to follow, as they say. Ling is definitely a woman that I wouldn't easily forget, because she had a really attractive, positive energy about her that was infectious. Ling was very happy to cuddle up to me and put her head on my chest whilst we chatted for a while after the aerobics. Most of the women I've known in these situations are very businesslike and won't hang around any longer than is necessary afterwards. So it was really nice to find such a warm, friendly and considerate young woman. I couldn't have been luckier on my last night in Bangkok. Even after spending 4 days wandering around Bangkok, I'm still amazed at just how many gorgeous women there are there. I'm now a huge fan of Thai women. Many of them wear very feminine summer dresses and they carry themselves with such elegance. Sadly, that is a much rarer thing to see in the UK these days than it was when I was growing up, and you're more likely to see women covered in tattoos and wearing jeans, t-shirts and Dr. Martens style boots with pink, red, blue or even green hair than to see a woman in a dress. I've just read this short story back to myself, and I'm aware that I sound like I'm some sort of advertisement for the hotel and cafe, but they don't know me from Adam, and no one is paying me to write this. The next morning, I left Bangkok for Pattaya, but that's another story. I'll write to you again to let you know what's happened. Thanks for reading this story out, and please keep up the good work. So I really enjoyed that story, very nice story. So I've got 2 more stories from this guy, so depending on what stories come in over the next week or so, I might read his next story out next week, but I have got 1 or 2 stories that have come in, so what I might do is read them out first, and then read his second story out on the second, the next week, after 2 weeks, because some people like several stories just rather than one. But I thought that was a really good story. Just before I go, I just want to make one comment. In there, he was Therme Cafe. It's famous. It's a place where freelancers hang out, and guys go there to, drink and hang out with freelancers, what have you. He was talking about, don't waste your time. He's seen guys sitting and just drinking and looking around and he can't understand it. Well, I can explain that. When you live here, when I used to live in Soy 24 years ago, me and friends, we'd go out to drink, and one of the places we'd stop off along the way would be Therme, and we might have 1 or 2 beers in there, but we're all married. We weren't out looking for women. We were just out drinking and having a good time with each other. So we'd go to Therme and we'd do exactly that. We'd sit down, we'd drink beer, we'd talk to each other, and we'd look around. I think it's a different story if you come here on holiday and you've got a short time to get as much action in, as they say, and that's what you're going to do. Like he says, you're in there, you see a beautiful woman, and he was away. I hope that explanation there made sense. And one other thing I'd like to say as well, if you ever go into Therme Cafe, it is absolutely true that ladyboys are not allowed to go into the cafe. That's why you see a lot of them hanging around outside. And the reason for that is historically, I don't want to say all ladyboys are bad, because they're not, but historically, missing purses, things that get stolen, purses out of bags, and guys getting ripped off. A lot of it is by ladyboys, because they want these operations done to turn them into real ladies. So years ago, Therme, the management of Therme, the hotel, they said the ladyboys can't come in. So you can be pretty well rest assured that everybody in Therme Cafe is actually a real woman. Okay? All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thanks very much to the guy for sending this story, and it was a great read. And don't forget, if you watch my channel regular, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button for regular notifications of updates. And I've got a fairly cheap membership which will give you early access to videos when they're released, and I have a members only live stream twice a month. Okay, thanks for watching this week, and I'll catch you next Saturday with some more stories.